Welcome back to Taste0fTruth Tuesdays. This week's episode, Your Metabolism Keeps the Score, is an interview with Jay Feldman on bioenergetic health, stress physiology, and what mainstream fitness culture misses. So without any further ado, let's begin the interview. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Taste0fTruth Tuesdays. And I am here with Jay Feldman from Jay Feldman Wellness. And thank you so much for joining me and my audience today. And before we get into the nitty-gritty, would you mind just introducing yourself, a little bit about your background and what led you to bioenergetic nutrition? And it's definitely different than mainstream fitness culture.
Yeah, it definitely is. And that's mostly where I started. And by the way, thank you for having me on, of course, Megan. So I started, as someone who was interested in health and fitness, very much from kind of the mainstream perspective, as a starting place. And continued digging deeper and, like so many of us do, found out that maybe wasn't the whole picture. There was some things left out of that conversation. And maybe all of the low-fat, vegetarian, whole grain sort of dietary approach wasn't, everything it was chalked up to be. So from there, that kind of evolved and got into paleo and intermittent fasting and low carb and keto. And all this time I was training as well, for fitness and athletic performance. And, I then went to go to college to study to be a doctor. I was pre-med with the perspective of, wanting to help people with their health. And as I began learning more, both about modern nutrition and, what we're told versus the reality, and then the same thing in the medical system, I realized that wasn't for most people, it isn't the way to actually improve health, right? That's the medical system is really a health management system, and it's great for managing symptoms, and there's a place for medications and all of that, but it certainly isn't oriented toward helping people improve their health when they're dealing with various issues. And so I started pivoting there, and at the same time, as I continued my own journey of learning about health and nutrition, I was doing the low carbon fasting, ketogenic diets, cyclical ketogenic diets, all of the really popular things, especially at the time and now. And I came across the bioenergetic perspective, came across some of Ray Peat's work, and it was really opening an area of health and physiology that I never considered when it came to nutrition, which was looking at what's going on in terms of our cells and mitochondria's ability to produce energy, to produce ATP. And that if we recognize, or when we recognize that that's really the driver of health and well-being and feeling really good, then we can orient everything else that we're doing around that, and realizing that things like fasting and low carb and cutting calories and a lot of the chronic restriction that I did for many, many years was a version of fighting against my body and depriving it of the energy that it needed. And that the calories or carbs or eating itself wasn't actually the enemy, but rather it was, the types of carbs, the types of foods that we're eating, the various other factors that prevent us from utilizing those foods well and converting them efficiently to energy. So I kind of pivoted there and, began to slowly step my way in and start to make some changes diet-wise, and pivoted away from pre-med as well. And so I really dove into the research and, shared that in articles and started a podcast and, helped people with their health. So that's what I do now as a health coach and independent health researcher. And I apply this bioenergetic approach and see how this model applies to every sort of chronic health condition, everything from fatty liver disease to diabetes to neurodegenerative conditions, cancer and on from there. And that, so I help people with those kinds of issues, but also improving sleep and blood sugar regulation and digestion and fatigue and, whatever else, all the other things that so many people are experiencing and dealing with.
Yeah. Well, I can relate a lot to your journey in some ways, because I was set to become a registered dietitian working alongside doctors and nurses with 2 feeding ratios and all sorts of goodness. And I was interested in organic, regenerative agriculture. Even then, the early 2000s, I was a pioneer back then. It was very difficult to find these products. And in Virginia for sure. And I would travel to the West Coast and frolic through these co-ops and the smell of a real natural grocery store was such a treat. Not something you find here in Mechanicsville, Virginia. Even still now, it's difficult to find these foods so many years later. But yeah, I also wanted to go more preventative. I said, I can't imagine sitting next to people who are at this like difficult part of their health journey and giving them Ensure and having to smile and nod through the process. It's just, your girl is going to get fired. I wouldn't last. And so thank you so much for explaining that, because seriously, the keto, the low carb, it's still really big. I interview quite a few folks who are proponents of those diets, and I always add disclaimers like heavily on that, and don't want to, be dogmatic. And most of them say they're not, and they're agnostic about it, while then also still doing the practice themselves. So I find it to be but tell me, why do you think this makes such a big difference? Because I did mention prior to record the other week, we talked about this Martin Picard energy constraint on health framework that was recently developed, talking about like not only what you were saying about just because we eat 120 calories of XYZ, it doesn't mean that that's what was converted into usable energy for your cell. And that's what you are focusing on with your clients. And that was what I was trying to present, that like a hot pocket versus a grass-fed steak, meal, very different when it comes to the signals that they're going to send to the metabolism. And then we expanded even further that if you are stressed out, if you are undernourished, overtraining, not sleeping well, then how your body prioritizes the very little or mismanaged energy is even more important to understand, because then recovery and those like not necessary for survival things will get put off on the back burner. And those things are super important for athletes. Hello, like we are constantly straining ligaments and tendons or trying new movements. And so we're going to need that extra, and also just the fact that exercise is stress in itself, right? And so these were concepts that are not taught in the bro fitness culture. It's just like no pain, no gain, and all that sort of stuff. So you and I have learned those lessons the hard way. And I hope people understand where we're coming from, and we don't just speak negatively about these practices because we've lived them, we've learned from them, and we're trying to like use a machete and cut through the bull and help folks dodge those pitfalls, right? So tell me, what's this main difference in regards to when we're focused on the cellular energy compared to the mainstream fitness, when it's like fat loss, low carb, that sort of nonsense?
Yeah, but I would say that there's a lot of like surface level differences, right, in terms of what the diet might look like and all of that. But on a more fundamental level, I think there are a couple of key differences. One is the perspective that if left to our own devices, our bodies would just cause us to eat a ton, we would get obese, we would get unhealthy. Like our bodies are like not something to be trusted. There's something to restrict. There's something to fight against. These signals that our bodies have are there to help us gain body fat, as opposed to the recognition that those signals are all there for a reason. And obviously we need to be careful with them in our modern world and modern environment, but the signals aren't the problem. And if you're hungry, that's your body telling you that it's lacking ATP, that it's lacking energy. I mean, the sensors that relate to the hunger signals in the liver and in the brain are sensing how much ATP there is. And you can eat a large meal and not use it well, or fill up your stomach with a big salad or something, and you might feel physically full, but the deeper hunger signal doesn't go away. And that's because that's an energy-based signal. And so I think that there's a really fundamental difference there, which is this idea of needing to restrict and fight against our bodies. And, this idea that, again, they're leading us astray, versus recognizing that those signals are there for a reason. And we should be able to get to a place where we aren't constantly restricting. We're not constantly hungry throughout the day. We're not always depriving ourselves of the foods that our body really wants. And you can actually get to a point where you're not enticed by the donut or the piece of cake or whatever it is that might not make you feel particularly good. And so I think that's one very fundamental difference in terms of the thought process. And then another one too is the lens through which we're looking at health. And I think in a lot of these other modalities, and I've been there myself, there are some extrapolations made and assumptions. There's like very particular pathways that are that are pointed to as to a reason why you don't want to eat carbs, or the reason why fasting is beneficial. It's because of autophagy, or the carbs are bad because they increase insulin, and insulin drives fat gain. And you can kind of isolate these pathways, but there's not an overarching understanding or concept of physiology. And when you do fundamentally understand how our cells produce energy and all of the other things that impacts, and how that relates to insulin, and how that relates to cortisol, and how that relates to our hunger signals, and how that relates to our reproductive hormones and our brain function and our digestion, and on from there, then the picture becomes a lot more clear. And so there's a very fundamental difference, I think, in terms of the way that we're, like, the model that we have when we're looking at health.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because even those who are going to say, yeah, I avoid carbs because of the insulin and it makes so much sense. And they'll say they feel great. They say they have so much energy and that they don't crave carbs. And, as a health coach or, fitness personal trainer, I personally find keto to be one of the hardest things to stick to, especially with like July 4th and holidays like that coming up. Folks are going to these barbecues, and I just don't find that to be a fun way to live life. They go to vacation. I'm in Mexico with my husband and I'm going to avoid carbs. I'm like, no chips and salsa in Mexico, WTF. There's lots of little, like you said, these caveats that really point out that there's more going on in the physiology, and it's not just trying to dogmatize this one element. Especially, I studied studied biochemistry, and I knew from the get-go how important carbohydrates were for human metabolism and how costly gluconeogenesis was. So it made absolutely no sense to me to do that to your body. Especially, I'd be running a boot camp class, and I'd be kicking all my clients' butts, which is debatable also, I know. But then they'd be on keto, and I'd be like, what in the kale is going on? I need to throw carbs at you right now, because you would have so much more fun in this workout. And I did paleo and I ran sprints one time, and I had like an actual metabolic shutdown. There was this pain behind my eyes. I felt really sick. I had to sit in my car. I felt physically very, very ill because I had just eaten like sausages and yams and some Brussels sprouts, the paleo diet, not enough fuel for this. I think it's very easy to fall into the propaganda and the influencers in this. It's so easy to do. It is so easy to try to think that if I can just restrict carbs, then I'm going to figure that out. So let's talk to my audience here, because most of them are like me, former athletes. We've got militaries, we've got veterans, we've got people who have spent years pushing through pain, overeating, overtraining, living on discipline and thinking, and that's so rewarded. You have to do it when you're in the military. You have to in some circumstances. And I'm grateful for that. And we can be grateful for those. But me being a bodybuilder, I didn't have to do those things, but I was like, woohoo, look at me. I'm going to go win another trophy. So what's your biggest advice to those of us who are feeling like, if I eat more than 1,500 calories, I get fat? I'm sure you hear that a lot. I hear that all the time from my listeners. So where can we start? What do we do?
Yeah. I mean, I totally understand that mindset and that place, because I was there, and I felt that same thing. I remember when I was young and I was in this like heavy calorie restriction. Again, that's what we were told that we needed to do to have a six pack and whatever else. And I remember seeing friends of mine who were, really fit, and they would eat, twice as much as me. And I was always, it was kind of like the start of some of my questioning of the things I was doing at the time, because something wasn't adding up. And I was like, if I did what they were doing, I would gain so much weight. I would gain all this body fat. They're eating pizza at night. Like, I know if I did that, then the next day I would like gain weight. Like that's, that's like, I just have a different physiology. I just have a different metabolism. And in some ways, there was some truth to that, in that the things that I was doing were severely downregulating my metabolism. So the relative overtraining, the under eating and undernourishment, the lack of giving my body the actual fuel that it needed, and then trying to force it through workouts and whatever else at the same time, was directly downregulating my metabolism, because our bodies view that as the most severe form of stress. People think about psychological stress from their job or whatever else, but a state of starvation of the body where it's forced to burn fuel that it doesn't have and take in small amounts of fuel is a severe, severe stress signal. And so what our bodies do is they downregulate all of the things that are not essential, right? It basically says there's only so much fuel and energy I have available. I have to put that toward the things that are absolutely necessary for me to live and survive. And everything else, I'm going to turn that down. So I'm going to turn down extra parts of cognitive function and immune function and detoxification and digestion and just get by on what I can, just barely. And at the same time, all of those same signals are also the signals that tell our bodies to conserve fuel. This is our stress signals like cortisol, which also, downregulates thyroid activity, with our thyroid being our main kind of metabolic regulator. Downregulates reproductive activity, which, is huge here. I think a lot of people in this place experience low libido and also other like downstream effects of the lack of reproductive hormones. And so, but as I was saying, along with this, what our bodies are saying is when we're in this conservation starvation state, I don't want to convert this fuel to energy. I want to store it because I know that tomorrow and the next day, the next day, the next week, and the next month, I'm going to need to have some fuel on board because of what my body's going through. And there's some truth in this idea that, if I'm stuck eating this low amount of food, because if I eat more, I'm going to gain some body fat. And that's the normal response to what we're putting our bodies through. And I think that's really the crux of it. Is it's not a broken metabolism. It's exactly what your metabolism is supposed to do when it's in the circumstance. And what we want to do is give it the opposite signal, start to provide the proper amount of fuel, reduce the amount of training if we're overtraining, make sure we're getting enough sleep, all of those things, so that it gets out of that state, so that the stress hormones come down and the thyroid comes back up and all of that. And then we'll see as we do that we do convert that fuel to energy, and we actually do feel more energetic throughout the day. We can focus better. Our bodies are working better. Our reproductive activity comes back up. But it takes time, and it's a slow process. But I think that that's the only way toward better health, especially when we're in that position.
Yes. And so this concept that we're touching on is like reverse dieting is a trendy topic. Slowly and strategically are both very key terms here, and increasing your caloric intake over time, especially when you're decreasing your physical activity. And so your girl might have thrown myself into all this a little quicker than I should have, and I am not going to beat myself up. The weight gain also with the chronic pain, the herniated disc, I just feel like the blessing was that I don't think I would have stopped working out as hard unless the pain kind of forced me to, if that makes sense. Now that I'm kind of getting over the hump of all of it, looking back, I'm like, it probably did all work out the way it needed to. And so can you help me though? Because there's something we need to touch on prior to even talking about reverse dieting. And because that's very scary. I mean, people would hire me, want to lose weight. And I'm like, well, you're eating like a bird right now. Therefore, we actually have to go through this whole other process before we can accomplish that goal. And they're not stoked for a lot of reasons. We need to talk about something prior though, because I can tell you for a while when I was on these restrictive diets, doing my bodybuilding on isogenics, doing the fasting, running on shakes, posting selfies, trying to sell all my products to people, raging the hula hoop, doing circus performances. I don't know how much you know about that past. I felt freaking great, Jay. I felt great. But I think what you need to help break down for us is there's a difference between running on real energy, real ATP, and stress hormones. Because I think there's a lot of running on stress. And before I hand off the mic, you also need to explain how awful it feels for a while when you crash and you stop running on stress hormones, because I don't want to sugarcoat this process for peeps. I do not. But I think it's very important that we understand what we're doing and going through. I don't think I had a strong enough pep talk to understand the physiological processes that I was going to embark on to kind of reverse the metabolic adaptations that I had done so I could then eat and train like the real athlete that I wanted to be. Does that make sense? So can you break down, how do we distinguish, or can you even, between, running on real good stuff or the stress hormones, and then why do we feel so crappy when we shift off of running off of those stress hormones?
Yeah, so this can vary a little bit based on where someone's at. You were saying that you were still feeling good at the time. Most people, when they've gotten to this place where, they're considering taking a different approach is because they've either fully crashed or they're starting to crash, right? The stress that they've been experiencing catches up to them. And you're right, initially stress can feel good. That's running on coffee throughout the day kind of thing. And you can feel like you have your focus, and that's just all borrowing energy from the future. But at a certain point, sometimes people will feel it gradually, but sometimes it comes in as a crash, and then all of a sudden you're not recovering anymore, and you can't get out of bed, and you're exhausted, and you do notice the drop in libido and all the other symptoms that tend to come. So some people have hit that crash, and for them, I think you could argue maybe it's a little easier just to recognize, okay, this isn't working, this isn't the right way to go. For someone who's feeling really good, of course, that can be a little bit different. But I think you mentioned the weight loss, where it's like someone who comes, maybe they're already operating in this perspective like of keeping the calories low and the restriction and the fasting and overtraining and everything, but they're wanting to lose some more weight. And normally, I mean, when we're in that position, the things we know for weight loss are more restriction, whether it's cutting the carbs lower or doing more fasting for multiple days at a time. If the intermittent fasting isn't working anymore, it's cutting the calories lower. And I think what we want to consider here, like there's an important perspective shift, which is short-term versus long-term when it comes to weight. So most people who are in that position have had the kind of classic yo-yo, where they're always fighting to stay at that lower weight, and they go through whatever intense regimen it takes to get there, and they maintain it for a short period of time, and then the weight starts to come back on because whatever they're doing isn't sustainable. And by not sustainable, I don't mean just in terms of what's comfortable, I mean in terms of the physiology. Again, when our bodies are at that point, every signal is not only pushing hunger, but also pushing regain of weight. And so most people have this kind of yo-yo, and they then look back at their last low and they say, well, I want to look like that. I just need to do what I did to get there. And they go through the same cycle over and over and over again. And I think it's important, if we look back and we see that in our history, it's important to recognize that that's not working. Like, this isn't sustainable. It's like what would actually work, what long-term success looks like, is we're at our healthy weight, our healthy goal weight, and we stay there comfortably long-term. It's not something that you hit the holidays and all of the weight comes back, or you go on a trip and all the weight comes back, or after a certain number of months, your body just starts regaining the weight. That's not, like, that wasn't successful. So I think part of it is recognizing that and that kind of shift in perspective, and instead orienting ourselves toward fixing the underlying metabolic issues, so that in the long term we can be at that healthy weight comfortably, and it's not a constant fight, and it's not constantly going back up. So I think those are some important caveats. But as far as if someone is running on stress heavily, the shift away from that sometimes it's like taking away the extra support. It's taking away the Band-Aid, or the crutch, I should say. So, again, the person who's running on coffee all day, they're drinking 6 cups of coffee a day and they're not eating much. I think we could all say pretty confidently that's not a good way to have energy. It's not a good way to get through the day, and at some point that'll catch up with us. If we take away that coffee, it's not going to feel good. Like, you're going to actually feel the tiredness that your body should be feeling from the lack of sleep or lack of energy. And you might actually feel the lows throughout the day that, again, are what's actually there that you've been covering up or using a crutch for. So there can be some aspects there. There should also be some positives, right? I mean, for people who are struggling, like people who are in that chronic high stress state, normally they're not feeling good in every way. Normally they're also dealing with trouble with sleep, maybe anxiety, maybe irritability, a lot of these kind of stress symptoms, like just not feeling calm and comfortable throughout the day. And so those things should be improving, that, like, we should be seeing that on the flip side. But there's something to be said for, without that crutch, actually feeling a little bit lower energy. And hopefully if we transition slowly, the underlying metabolic state picks up and makes up for some of that lack as we go. So that's really our goal and our target. We shouldn't be just feel like crashing, as we take out the crutch. Like, we should be feeling okay, but sometimes there's a little bit of a lag time, and sometimes it can take some time there. But ideally that's something we want to minimize, but also we want to recognize going in that what we're doing currently isn't sustainable, right? The running on stress is only going to get us so far. So
Yeah, I appreciate the major focus shift, as you were saying. What you focus on, you find. So if your focus was always like weight loss, I want to look like that, and we're not going to find that for a while as we're going to be doing this bioenergetic process. But if we focus on the little subtle shifts, like, oh, I'm able to sit still for a while and finish a show or read a book, or so my dog was licking their paws. It's really obnoxious, but I was able to tolerate a little better, irritability or something like that, right? That's really important. And so something I did with my clients was biofeedback weekly check-in. So it was not just about how was your workouts, how many reps did you do, and how many calories did you eat. It was sleep, but it went deeper in the psychology of like, what was their self-talk like? And I found some similar patterns too. And there's so many things that we have to tackle as health coaches, because it is the mind and the body are always working, whether they're against each other or together. And there's so much stinking thinking that can weave into this. And I'm obviously preaching to myself here when it comes to watching how you talk to yourself, how you approach the meals that you're eating, and the slow and steady progress. I specifically remember one client who I had to fire because she was the one I was kind of thinking of earlier. It was like, I want to lose weight, but I'm only eating 1,500 calories and barely that. She also had GERD. So gastric, esophageal, issues with acid. And then she also had a shoulder injury. I was very limited on the exercises I could program for her. And I was like, sis, this is the opposite thing. You need to be stressing out right now. Like, we have digestive issues. We have a chronic injury that we need to heal. We need to just switch your focus. What you focus on, you find. There's a lot of other aspects of health that we could discover together, on our journey, and then eventually get you to a place where you respond better. So that biofeedback check-in was allowing for them to say like, oh yeah, I was sleeping better, or oh, my poops really, poops are so important. And we did study that a lot in dietetics, the Bristol stool chart. I used to have it like pinned up in my college dorm, especially because my senior project, we did something on oat bran. And I'm sure we could have a great debate about that in the bioenergetic world, about satiety and fullness and how good or bad oats are. And again, I don't want to get too dogmatic about some of those things, especially socioeconomic. Some people can afford carbs and grains a lot easier. But anyways, getting off topic, I do appreciate kind of the positive shift that you were saying, trying to focus on the bigger overall aspects of health, especially, I don't know how old you are, my friend, but I am now 40 wonderful. And so fitness over 40 is going to look a little different than it did when I was 24, and as a circus performer. And I think that is something that's difficult for I think a lot of my clients were 40 when I was working with them 20 years ago. And I don't think I truly understood hormones. And I even saw someone lecture you recently in your comment section. They were like, oh, I'm not going to listen to you because you're not a medical doctor. You don't understand menopause. I think you might know what comment I was talking about. I was like, dang, they obviously don't know Jay's work very well. But people just get really protective, women, when we're perimenopause or menopause, because it is very complex, the systems. And so I do appreciate that you really unpack a lot of that on your channel and help those of us, especially with hormone replacement therapy. And you've been really unpacking retatrutide and some of these other peptide stuff, which is, all the hot to trot. Kind of off topic today because it's a little more advanced in metabolic stuff. Some of my listeners are probably biohackers. I'm interested in some of that stuff. But let's get back to, let's say, the last thing I wanted to mention is I did find that burnout crash point. That is what led me here. I don't know if anyone's going to say, hey, I'm feeling really good and I'm actually really liking this low, it's very rare to find someone on the high to want to shift gears. And we think about the strong sisters, they lost their period. We basically hit rock bottom. For me, I had shingles at age 35 and I had these canker sores, 22, 25, all over my tongue, my lips, my mouth. I remember I was like hiking Mount Fuji, doing cool stuff, but it was so hard to like drink out of my little sucky, pack. I wasn't healthy. And so I look back and I was lean. I was like 45 pounds leaner. I have to remind myself though, you were in terrible pain. You were miserable. And you were binge eating 1,600 calories before 10 a.m. and then freaking out and not, I have to remind myself where I was, and how that wasn't sustainable or fun. I was living in Tokyo, recently married, and wanted to rage life, not be freaking out about, did I track those 6 almonds I just ate? It's not sustainable. So let's say now we're talking to people who are like, okay, I'm picking up what you're putting down, guys. It's making sense. It's making sense. So what does this metabolic recovery actually look like? Like, let's break it down into some tangible advice instead of just talking abstract, fluffy stuff.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, first thing is considering this in terms of our energy balance. So we're thinking energy supply versus energy demand. So our energy supply is the food that's coming in and how well we're actually converting it to energy. How much ATP do we have there? And then how much of a demand are we putting on our bodies between activity, between work, between psychological stress? Are there other stresses in our environment? Whether it's, like high amounts of artificial light and EMFs or, other maybe aspects of our day-to-day life that are, putting a big toll on us. Chronic infections, whatever the issue is, maybe digestive issues. So we want to be considering that balance and getting that into balance, like increasing that energy supply and reducing the demand is really the key for recovering metabolically and getting out of that chronic stress state. So normally what that involves is slowly and carefully increasing the amount of food that we're eating if we're under eating, which a lot of people are in the context that we're talking about. And again, if you're quote unquote stuck eating 1,500 calories a day, I don't think that means we should jump to 2,500 or 3,000 or something like that in most cases. Generally, we want to go up slowly. And if we're really cutting the carbs, definitely want to bring those carbs in. The carbs are vital here when it comes to supporting us metabolically. So those would be probably our two first steps. And going slow also helps because normally when we're in this suppressed metabolic state, digestion is a huge issue. It's a huge consideration. And if we were to bring in some harder to digest carbohydrate sources, we might get bloated or have some like discomfort. And those are not only not ideal from the digestion standpoint, but they also point to some underlying impacts where normally that means that we're feeding bacteria. We might be dealing with some excess endotoxin production from the intestinal bacteria, and that can then interfere with our energy producing processes. It interferes with mitochondrial function. So that's a pretty important piece. If we're reintroducing carbs that we haven't eaten in a long time, it's important that we do it slowly and carefully and that we're testing different foods to make sure that we digest and absorb them well. So those are the first kind of two steps on the supply side, is getting enough fuel in, working toward enough fuel. And if you're chronically hungry, you're not eating enough. Like that's kind of the like a clear sign. If you're a little unsure, another thing you could do is just look at an average calorie calculator for your height, weight, activity level. Not that these are fully accurate, but just to get a ballpark of what someone around your size and activity should be eating. And if you're eating less than that, again, that's a sign that we're not eating enough for our body's needs. And so slowly working up, total calories and especially carbohydrates, if we've been avoiding those. If we've been fasting or intermittent fasting, like very slowly starting to bring in maybe a little bit of a breakfast. And again, normally hunger is really suppressed in the morning for a lot of people who have done intermittent fasting. So don't force a big meal. Start with something light, maybe a little bit of fruit or something like that. And we'll see the appetite start to come up. So those are some of the really important steps on the supply side. On the demand side, if we're in that overtraining camp, if we're pushing ourselves extremely hard every workout, we're exhausted after, toning down the intensity a little bit, maybe toning down the frequency, the length of the workouts, like all those things, could be really like essential here if we're really overdoing it. But yeah, small steps in those directions. Those would be probably like the biggest first steps.
Yeah, I think you really articulated it really simple, because there's, like you said, there's like different types of inputs that we need to look at. Like it's stress, but then it's not like how we're working out, and then also what we're eating and how we're eating. And so I do have a chart that I will add in the show notes. I was kind of scrolling right now trying to find it because I didn't have it in my Canva. Which, do you still make content, like little dinky stuff that we used to make on Instagram back in the day when people used to share it all the time? You know what I mean?
I've never been like particularly good at those kinds of graphic things. So I've always had someone help me with that because it's just not in my wheelhouse.
I hear you. Like the Strong Sisters, aren't they just masters of like every single skill, it seems? Here it is. Yay. So I'm going to share my screen really quick, guys, because what he just mentioned was looking up the calories. And so can you see this chart?
Yeah.
Great. So it's, again, these are basic recommendations. This is from 2014. So, but it does show. So if we can look right here, you can see most females that I was working with are probably somewhere in the age of 31 to 50. Most of them are coming to me eating 1,200 to 1,500 calories. Would you agree? Is that what you see? A lot of your clientele are somewhere in this bracket here, male,
Yeah, for
female.
sure. Yeah.
Right. And would you recommend this would be some ideal calorie ranges from 2,200 to 2,400 for a male and at least 1,800 if they're sedentary?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking minimums here.
Minimums, right?
Yeah, minimum. I mean, I think for the category that we've kind of been talking about here, they would fall more on the active side.
Right. Or
Talking
even,
20, 2,300 calories. Is it 23, 22? And then 28 to 100 to 3,000 for men. I mean, yeah, I think those are, if we're just looking for like super rough across the board estimates, like those are okay targets to start with. But yeah, I mean, with women that I'm working with, it's really rare that that our target is going to be below 2,000 calories.
Yeah, typically they're eating like look at your guys. If you are 4 to 8 years old, you can eat 1,200 to 1,400 calories. So that's what I try to explain to them. I'm like, you are eating what a toddler should be eating. It's kind of difficult to have them wrap their brains around that. I really do think that that's something that we're all going to work on, trying to redevelop a different relationship with energy and nutrients and how we're fueling, because there's just so much of this. MyFitnessPal propagated, or Weight Watchers propagated, that number of 1,200, 1,500 calories. Like, it's not backed in anything legitimate or good. We got these ideas from, gosh, so much of it is social engineering. And I try to remind myself of that, because that's just, if you're a conspiracy realist like myself, it gets you in all sorts of dark rabbit holes. And I just want to be in control of my own decisions. That's just what I'm trying to say here. You know what I mean, Jelly Bean? So just notice where the influence is coming. And again, that stinking thinking and being like, I just need to focus on, like, a body neutral fitness is a big thing I focus on. And, in Megan Me Fit world, which was like just having a body appreciation. Like, I'm so grateful I can get, especially Fitness Over 40. We are thinking about, can I wipe my own butt in 25 years? Can I get up and down off the toilet? Like, these are serious things to ponder as we get older. And so it's like, that's why I'm training, just for functional fitness, to get in and out of my car, to take care of my chickens, to weed my garden. Like, those are some serious tasks that weren't able to do when I was dealing with chronic pain. And so, yeah, just having energy. So a tip that I wanted to give for folks who might 30 to 60 minutes after waking, we should be
really difficult if it was before waking. Yeah.
You're right. You're right. But I should probably be working on that, because I just undereat no matter what. So anyways, thank you for correcting. I'm so hyped. But I did a kefir drink. And so, ideally you'd be making your own kefir or finding some non-pasteurized kefir, but that can be hard to find for folks. So store-bought kefir, I think, can be fine. But I would do 3-4 ounces of orange juice, stir in some collagen, maybe some creatine, and then do some kefir and a splash of maple syrup. And it would be so freaking good. Kind of take like an orange lassi or something. And I would just be able to drink it down. But like, it's pretty difficult for someone who's been restricting to then eat like eggs and sausage, or, a big meal, like you said. So eating some fruit, eating a boiled egg, those are great starts. And maybe a kefir drink is another great start to get, some sort of, balance, protein, carbs, and fats down the hatch. And you might notice you'll be hungry, an hour or two after that, kind of getting some energy in, stimulating the metabolism. Are there any other little tricks you have, like little meals that have really worked for your clients that are easy, fast to do if they're on their way to work, that they could try to supplement? And instead of skipping breakfast, what could they add in?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on some of the main ones, right? I mean, juice and fruit, smoothies are really easy, and you can add protein powder in there for trying to like really replace a breakfast. Hard-boiled eggs, if they're already prepared, is really easy. And dairy-based things, right? So like yogurt can be an easy one on the go as well if we need that. Yeah.
Yeah. But can you just touch on, like, a lot of folks are told that fruit is really bad for them, or that even specifically fruit juice is really bad for them. Can you touch on that really quick before we kind of move to close down the interview?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's really only coming from one place, which is the idea that carbs and specifically sugars are not healthy for us. And I mean, there can be a lot to unpack there as far as the possible reasons that are given for that and where they fall short. And I believed all this at one point. I mean, I've been there, and so many of my clients say this too, where it's like, going in, they could never, like fruit juice is poison, right? There's no situation where that would ever be on the menu. Like it is so far from health food. So I totally get that perspective. I've been there. What I would say in short is that those carbohydrates are incredibly important for producing energy effectively, turning down our stress hormones, supporting thyroid activity, supporting the reproductive hormones, supporting liver function. And so much of what we're told is kind of reductionism, this idea that anything that increases insulin drives fat gain is very, very much um, very far from the truth at all. But yeah, those are large myths to dispel. I do have a number of videos and podcast episodes going through that on my channel if anyone's interested, kind of breaking down the physiology and all of that.
Yeah, I'll link those because you do. And you've been having my girl Teresa on, and I've been loving those episodes. We've had her on Taste of Truth Tuesdays, and I'm so grateful for that. So I want to share my screen one more time because we were just talking about how much, like, here's a little infographic I made of what 1,800 calories looks like. And I remember it being a lot of folks were in the comment section being like, what? That is so much food. And, I did this on my, use Chronometer for calorie tracking because you can pay and get the micronutrients. And so I did plug this all in, trying to get kind of close to that. I just wanted to show the audience really quick what we're talking about here. If you want to, obviously, we want you slowly and systematically increasing from 1,200, 1,500 calories to this baseline of 1,800 calories. But this is a pretty good idea. Obviously, you might not like some of these protein choices. That's up to you to pick and choose something else. And as I slowly increased it, and you can find me on Instagram if you guys want to nerd out on these OG graphics from 2020. They're so freaking cheesy looking. Look at my little gummy bears. They're cute. Anyways, I think that's kind of helpful. Some folks need visualizations. That's why I wanted to pop on and show these for folks to kind of say, this is how much food that looks like. And sipping on juice or some sort of like adrenal cocktail during your workout is another great way to reduce stress and helps just keep the body in a less sympathetic state while you're training. That was something that was really big for me. And just adjusting how I was moving. Like, have you ever heard of Indian clubs?
No.
Oh my gosh, I'm obsessed. I'll send you some stuff. I've been training with them, but they're like 1 pound bamboo, and you can do a lot of different movement patterns with them. But the way that they work with your fascia and your joints, it's and the vectors and the physics of it all, like that 1 pound club gets pretty heavy pretty quick. And you can just the way that it was used in India a long time ago, and then the British and the Germans, and it came over probably 1800s, didn't come to America until the very late. I don't know if you love history like me, but I'm obsessed. But yeah, it's really cool stuff. I'll share it because it mixes like mind and body, breath, ambidextry, coordination. It's like, I want to start a trend of all of us doing Indian clubs. It's a super cool fitness trend that's so good for your mind and body and breath. And it's not overtraining. You know what I mean? Like, it's not hard on my spine. It's not hard on your joints, but it's something that can really help your mind and body and multitasking and just like kind of, I don't know, working against the brain rot that we see in today's society as well, right? So is there anything you want to close down the conversation with? I will link like lots of your episodes and recent ones that we've touched on some of those topics for folks who want to nerd out. And if they want to hire you, reach out and contact us. I'll put that info. But what else would you like to just close down the combo with? I really appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, of course. I mean, a couple of other thoughts just based on some things you had brought up and talking about, especially like the total amount of calories we should be eating in a day and reframing that. What we've been given, whether it's cutting calories or fasting or anything like that, is the only solution when someone is trying to shift the blame away from the poor quality diets in the Western world, right? That is the kind of mainstream propaganda when it's, the food that we're feeding you isn't bad, right? That's not the problem. You're just gluttonous and you're just eating too much of it. And that's where that comes from, right? That's where this, calorie model comes from, this idea of it's just about how much you're eating. And it's not about Coca-Cola. It's not about McDonald's. It's not about anything like that. It's not about the ingredients that are in every single processed food, So what we want to reframe this as is we want to be able to eat a lot of calories. We want to be able to eat as much as possible without gaining weight, of course, like the goal not being that we're gaining weight, but rather that our metabolic rate is high, that we're able to use a lot of fuel and convert that fuel to energy, because that energy is not only how we function day to day, but it's how we improve our basic functions is how we regenerate from long-term damage and injury and all of that, but long-term physiological damage too. So that's really where we want to orient ourselves toward. Again, that doesn't mean just doubling the amount of food that we're eating. If we're eating 1,200 calories, jump to 2,500. Definitely not saying that. But long term, if we're able to maintain our weight, let's say at 2,000 calories instead of 1,200, that means that you have that much more energy to support all of your body's functions. And that's really what we want to be targeting. So yeah, hopefully that helps a little bit as well with the reframing. I think also looking back historically, even 100 years ago, the amount that people were eating was far more than what we're eating now, and it's not the amount that we're eating is definitely not the issue here. So yeah, just some closing thoughts. The other thing I would mention as well is for anybody who's looking for what I would say are the best foods for supporting our metabolism and the ones that are easiest to digest as well, I have a free food guide that they can download at jayfeldmanwellness.com/guide.
I wanted to show really quick, I mentioned that this was the hierarchy of energy needs, that recent research from Martin Picard that I'll send you. I think you'd seriously nerd out on his whole Substack. And it kind of goes over what you're just talking about. This is what they're saying is the baseline stuff of the vital organs and functions. This is the stuff that if you're barely eating enough food, your body is going to prioritize that. But those skills, vitality, motivation, cognitive, reproduction, this stuff up top, that's the stuff that never gets the energy that it needs, which is why, so we could even see why modernity is socially fragmenting. There's so many levels of this. And so as you were saying, we're fueling ourselves efficiently, then all of this gets the nourishment it needs. Your entire system gets everything it needs from top to bottom. And so I'll share that in the show notes and then also send it to you and make sure we have all the links in the episode for my folks who might want to nerd out and learn more from you. So again, thank you so much for just breaking down some of these concepts for us, helping push through the calories in, calories out lie that won't die, and helping break down what it feels like to run on stress and kind of understanding that maybe not. My dietitian, you probably know Chew Foods Wisely, dear Nicole. And if you don't, I'll have to send you, but she's always telling me as my functional nutritionist about drinking too much coffee, on under eating. She's like, you're just pouring jet fuel, and that's not really going to work on a very under fueled metabolism. So, there's a lot of folks who are trying to spread the good word out there, and I appreciate you being one of them. So thank you guys for listening. And until next time, stay curious, embrace skepticism, and keep tuning in.